the flickering light of Asia, or the Assyrian nation and church. Here in the valley of Kurdistan sounded the first fearful echoes of Islam's declaration of holy war. The Kurds were urged to kill all Christians, otherwise they would be regarded as outcasts from religion and treated as traitors to the government. On the other hand, the death of every victim in their hands would add to their great reward in the Prophet's paradise. The unprotected villages and communities of the Assyrians, which were situated on the plains, were immediately attacked. A few managed to escape to the mountains where the Brethren were. The larger number of them, however, which included women, children, and the aged, were killed in manners that outdid the ferocity of Tamerlane. All the inhabitants of Gavur district were gathered together. Some were pressed into the houses, and the houses were set on fire. Others were thrown into wells and ditches and were buried alive. All the Nestorians of Gavur and the adjoining plain country were totally exterminated, including the Christians of Albeck and Barvar and Kuchanis. As the work of the Assyrians' massacre went on, strong fears were entertained for the safety of the patriarch, who had returned to his ecclesiastical see after his conference with the leaders of the mountain tribes. The members of the patriarch's family had escaped to a place of comparative safety, but Marshamun himself, together with his brothers, remained in Kuchanis waiting for further developments. All attempts on the part of the patriarch to convince the Turkish government and local authorities of the innocence and the harmlessness of the Assyrians failed, and the flames of the massacre were gradually enveloping Kuchanis itself. Marshamun was also compelled to desert his ecclesiastical see and join the members of his household in Diz, where he could be more accessibly protected by his mountain warriors. The valor and fighting questions of the Nestorians being known to the Turkish authorities, the latter had secretly developed their siege plans to envelop Marshamun and his mountaineers, cut off every possible avenue through which they might escape, and also prevent all possible communications they might effect with the Russian forces in Persia. A Russian contingent prior to this movement of the combined forces of the Turks and the Kurds had penetrated into Turkey and had advanced as far as the district of Gavur, where the greatest Assyrian massacre so far had taken place, but only to return back to Persia and leave behind a greater determination on the part of the enemy, if that were possible, to exterminate all the Nestorians, and indeed, the failure of the Turks to carry out this diabolical program in its entirety falls short of only a miracle. While the final escape of the main body of the people, who found themselves thus surrounded on all sides, must be regarded as an absolute act of superhuman and divine deliverance. Against this force, the Assyrians set in battle line 400 warriors only. The hostilities opened and the battle raged with determination. The younger Assyrians fought their older folks gathered in places of worship and prayed. Before the first day of the battle was over, the Turkish army was put to fight in great confusion, and left behind many dead and wounded. The few Assyrians charged like tigers in pursuit of the fleeing enemy. The Turks fell as they ran till the hill slopes were covered with their bodies. Some sought the shelter of the rocks, where they were later found and taken captive. A few managed to escape and reach the main Turkish camp on the opposite side of the river Zava, and there to repeat the story of the Nestorians' valor. They, however, were entirely ignorant of an angel's ladder, which was carrying to the throne of mercy the tears and the supplications of praying men and women. Tears and supplications which turned out to be infinitely more mighty than the boom of the thundering cannon, and infinitely more effective than the vibrations of the exploding shells. The would-be tragedy was turned into a providential victory, the value of which was enhanced by the amazing discovery that in this heated battle, only 3 Nestorians were found wounded, and their wounds were amazingly slight. Had the Turks succeeded in this initial attempt, which was followed by larger forces, perhaps no Nestorian would have been left to tell the story. During the months of July and August, about 6 battles were fought on a large scale, and in all of them, the Nestorians had the best of the enemy, even though the latter had employed vastly superior numbers. While the losses of the Turks and Kurds in each engagement were counted by the hundreds, those of the Assyrians in all these engagements became incredibly small, and one almost hesitates to give figures which fall below 30, including all casualties. Prior to these events, the Russian forces in Persia had succeeded in sending some guns and ammunition to the Syrian Patriarch at the urgent request of the latter, but these were altogether too inadequate to cope with the precarious situation of the Nestorians, who were now face to face with a trained army of Turks. under the leadership of Aydar Beg Pasha, the governor of Mosul, and assisted by the hordes of the Kurds under their several chieftains. Realizing the danger of their position, the Assyrian leaders managed to send a messenger to the Patriarch, who was still in Diz, urging him by an epistle to endeavor in some way to get either to Persia or Bashkala in Turkey and ask in person for the Russian assistance in men. Some 40 Assyrians were selected to accompany Marshamun and Bishop Yav Allaha of Amedia on his most hazardous mission, which led through the very country now occupied in the force by the Turks and the Kurds. Filling their sacks with parched wheat, the Patriarch and the bishop and their attendants were sent away secretly by a praying multitude, who committed them to the protecting shadow of the Almighty's wing. They slept in the daytime and traveled on foot during the night, often reaching within a hailing distance from an enemy who knew no law save that of murder and bloodshed. The Patriarch with his party reached safely the Russian headquarters in Bashkala, but only to return in similar manner, without bringing back with them the desired assistance. The fact was made known to the mountain Nestorians, and the situation became desperate. The strongest element of a nation was now facing total extermination. The Turks had constructed a bridge over the river Zaba, the roaring floods of which had heretofore served as an impenetrable barrier to the advance of the enemy. They had also planted their cannon of heights that commanded the positions of their opponents on the either side of the river. The Assyrians had courage enough to fight 1 against 10 and even 20. But how could they resist the explosives that were reducing the mightiest fortifications of Europe? It was the desperation of a cat pressed into a corner by a pack of dogs, and compelled to fight to the finish in spite of the overwhelming odds against it.